January 29th, 1945. A cold winter afternoon at a small farmhouse in Holtzheim, Belgium. It was a cold winter afternoon at a small farmhouse in Holtzheim, Belgium. In war, some moments last for hours, while others last only a single breath, but they can still decide who lives and who dies. First Sergeant Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse, and he stopped. In front of him stood nearly 90 German soldiers. Half of them already held weapons. The other half were reaching for rifles stacked in the snow. Kneeling in front of them were 4 young American soldiers, their hands locked behind their heads. Only 20 minutes earlier, many of these Germans had been prisoners, captured during the fighting that morning. Now they were free, armed, and organizing to strike Funk's company from behind. A German officer stepped forward and slammed a submachine gun into Funk's stomach. He shouted something in German. Funk did not understand. Neither did his men. The officer shouted again, louder this time, his face turning red with anger. Funk looked at the 90 Germans. He looked at his 4 kneeling soldiers. He looked at the weapon pressed into his gut. And then, at the worst possible moment, Leonard Funk began to laugh. What happened next lasted less than 60 seconds. Approximately 21 German soldiers were killed. The rest would throw down their weapons and surrender again. And Leonard Funk would earn the Medal of Honor for one of the most extraordinary acts of combat in World War II. All of it because he could not stop laughing. But to understand why a 5'5" sergeant from Pennsylvania laughed when surrender seemed certain, you must go back 6 weeks earlier. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. was born on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania. Steel country, smokestacks and foundries lining the Monongahela River about 8 miles east of Pittsburgh. The kind of town where men went to work before sunrise and came home after dark, their clothes stained with soot and sweat. Funk grew up fast. He learned responsibility early, taking care of his younger brother while their parents worked. By the time he graduated high school in 1934, the Great Depression was grinding through its 5th year. Jobs were scarce. College was something other people's children did. By 1941, as war raged across Europe and Asia, Congress extended the Selective Service Draft, and Funk's number was called. Funk's number came up. He reported to the induction center at Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 24 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 140 pounds. The Army examiner probably looked at him and thought about clerk duty, maybe supply work, safe jobs for small men. They were wrong about Leonard Funk. He volunteered for the paratroopers. In 1941, American airborne forces barely existed. The whole concept was new and untested. Jumping out of perfectly good aircraft to land behind enemy lines and fight surrounded. It sounded like suicide to most soldiers. The men who volunteered were a different breed. They had to be. Airborne training was designed to break you. 5 weeks of running, jumping, climbing, falling, brutal physical conditioning that washed out half the candidates before they ever saw an aircraft. Then came the jump towers. Then the real aircraft. The first time a man steps out of a C-47 transport at 1,200 feet, everything in his body screams to grab the door frame and hold on. The ground is a long way down. The wind tears at your face. Your parachute is just fabric and cord and faith. Funk earned his jump wings. He was assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. They trained at Camp Blanding, Florida, where the heat and humidity made Pennsylvania winters seem gentle by comparison. The 508th shipped to England in late 1943 and joined the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans. He joined the 82nd Airborne Division, a unit hardened by earlier campaigns in Sicily and Italy. They'd already jumped into combat. They'd already killed and watched friends die. Funk was the new guy, 27 years old, ancient by paratrooper standards. Most of his squad mates were barely 20. But Funk had something they didn't. Maturity. Steadiness. The kind of quiet competence that makes men follow you into hell without asking questions. By D-Day he was a squad leader. By war's end, he'd be acting company executive officer. First, though, he had to survive Normandy. June 6th, 1944. 1:30 in the morning. The C-47 Skytrain shuddered as flak exploded around it. Funk stood in the stick, the line of paratroopers waiting to jump, 60 pounds of equipment strapped to his body. M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, ammunition, grenades, rations, medical kit. The aircraft was at 400 feet, too low for a safe jump, but the pilots couldn't climb higher. German anti-aircraft fire was everywhere. Tracers arced through the darkness like angry fireflies. The men could hear metal fragments pinging off the fuselage. The green light came on. Funk jumped. The propeller blast hit him like a physical blow. Then his parachute deployed, and the world went strangely quiet. Below him lay France. Occupied France. Enemy territory in every direction. The Normandy invasion involved 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. They were supposed to land behind the beaches, secure bridges and crossroads, and prevent German reinforcements from reaching the coast. Nothing went according to plan. German anti-aircraft fire had scattered the formations across 50 miles of French countryside. Paratroopers were landing in flooded fields and drowning under the weight of their equipment. Others came down in the middle of German camps and died before they could cut free of their harnesses. Funk landed hard, his ankle twisted on impact. The pain was immediate and intense, the kind that makes your vision go white for a moment. He'd later learn it was badly sprained, possibly fractured. Every step would be agony for the next 2 weeks. But he could walk. He could fight. That was all that mattered. He gathered his parachute, buried it, and started moving. He had landed many miles from his intended drop zone, deep inside German-held territory, alone and in the dark. In the dark. Alone. Within hours, Funk had collected a group of lost paratroopers, men from different units, different companies, different regiments, 18 of them eventually, all looking for leadership. Funk gave it to them. One of those men, years later, would tell his grandchildren about finding Sergeant Funk in the pre-dawn darkness. "We were lost," the old paratrooper reportedly said. "Scared. Scattered across France like seeds in the wind. Then this short sergeant with a busted ankle took charge. He didn't ask permission, he just led. And we followed." For many days, Funk led this makeshift group through German-held territory, moving at night and hiding during the day, and despite constant danger, the group managed to survive and eventually rejoin Allied forces. They traveled at night, hid by day, fought when they had to. Despite his injured ankle, Funk insisted on serving as lead scout, putting himself in the most dangerous position to protect his men. It was the kind of leadership that couldn't be taught in training, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than military doctrine. They linked up with Allied forces on June 17th. Every single man survived. Not one casualty. 10 days behind enemy lines, 40 miles of German-occupied France. And Leonard Funk brought them all home. For his actions during the campaign, Funk later received several military decorations, including the Silver Star, recognizing his courage and leadership in combat, plus a Bronze Star for meritorious service, plus his first Purple Heart. By most soldiers' standards, that would be enough for a lifetime. Enough to tell your grandchildren around the dinner table. Enough to hang on the wall and remember when you were young and brave, and the world needed you. For Leonard Funk, it was just the beginning. September 17th, 1944. Holland. Operation Market Garden. The largest airborne assault in history. 35,000 paratroopers dropped into the Netherlands to capture a series of bridges across the Rhine. British, American, and Polish forces all jumped together. If it worked, the Allies would be in Germany by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's plan was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. The paratroopers had to capture and hold 7 bridges across 64 miles of Dutch territory, while ground forces raced up a single highway to link up with them. Everything depended on speed, on surprise, on nothing going wrong. Everything went wrong. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the furthest bridge, and found themselves surrounded by SS Panzer divisions that weren't supposed to be there. For 9 days, they fought and died in the streets. Only 2,000 of 10,000 men made it out. The bridge too far entered military history as a cautionary tale. But Leonard Funk didn't know about the big picture. He only knew his mission: support the landings, secure the drop zones, kill Germans. After touching down, his company secured their objective. Then Funk noticed something that wasn't part of the plan. 3 German 20mm Vierling anti-aircraft guns were firing at the incoming Allied gliders. The gliders carried reinforcements, jeeps, artillery pieces, ammunition, medical supplies. If those guns kept firing, hundreds of men would die before they even hit the ground. The gun position was dug in on high ground near Coxhill. Approximately 20 German soldiers manning the weapons and providing security. Sandbags, camouflage, interlocking fields of fire. Standard military doctrine says you need a 3-to-1 numerical advantage to assault a prepared defensive position. Funk had 3 men. He was outnumbered 7-to-1. He attacked anyway. What happened at that gun position has been pieced together from after-action reports and German records captured later in the war. The defending soldiers likely saw 4 American paratroopers approaching across open ground. They probably thought it was suicide. 4 men against a fortified position. Maybe the Americans didn't know they were there. Maybe they were lost. Then Funk and his 3-man patrol opened fire. The engagement was over in minutes. Security detachment neutralized. Gun emplacements stormed. All 3 weapons and their crews were destroyed. 20 Germans, 3 Americans. The guns fell silent. The gliders landed safely. The Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest decoration for valor, 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Funk now had a Silver Star and a DSC, 2 of the rarest combat decorations in the American military. Most soldiers who earn even 1 are considered heroes for life. Leonard Funk still wasn't done. December 16th, 1944. The Germans launched their last desperate offensive. The Germans launched their last desperate offensive with 3 main armies, and they threw roughly 400,000 men and thousands of armored vehicles and guns into the Ardennes. They crashed through the American lines in the Ardennes forest, aiming for the port of Antwerp. Hitler's plan was insane, but almost worked. He was gambling everything on one massive attack: split the Allied armies, capture Antwerp, force a negotiated peace in the west so Germany could focus on the Soviets in the east. For the Americans, it was a nightmare. The offensive hit thinly held sectors manned by green troops, and exhausted veterans pulled off the line to rest. Entire divisions crumbled. Thousands of soldiers surrendered. The German advance created a bulge 50 miles deep in the Allied lines. The Battle of the Bulge. The largest battle the American army would fight in World War II. It became the Battle of the Bulge, and by the end the US Army had suffered roughly 80,000 casualties. The weather was brutal. Snow, ice. The weather was brutal, and the temperature fell below freezing for days, so men froze in foxholes and weapons and vehicles failed. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Weapons jammed. Vehicles wouldn't start. The cold was as deadly as the Germans. Then came Malmedy. December 17th, 1944. 1 day into the offensive. A convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was moving near Bonnier Crossroads when they ran into the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Peiper, an SS armored battle group. The Americans were rear echelon troops, artillery observers, radio operators. They weren't equipped for a fight with tanks and armored infantry. After a brief clash, many of the men in the convoy surrendered, and they were lined up in a field near the Baugny crossroads. When the Germans left, at least 84 Americans were dead, and just over 40 had survived by fleeing or by playing dead. They were herded into a farmer's field near the crossroads. Hands up, disarmed, prisoners of war protected under the Geneva Convention. Then the SS opened fire. Machine guns, pistols, rifles. The Germans shot them down like cattle. Men who tried to run were cut down in the snow. Men who fell wounded were finished off with shots to the head. 84 Americans died in that field. Some survived by playing dead. They lay in the snow for hours while German boots walked past them, while German voices laughed. When darkness came, 43 survivors crawled away and made it back to American lines. The news spread through the American army like wildfire. The news spread fast across the front, and by that evening many American units had heard that prisoners were being executed. The Germans were executing prisoners. The SS was murdering men who'd surrendered in good faith. Malmedy changed everything. Before December 17th, the war in Europe had rules. Unofficial, unspoken, but real. Soldiers surrendered when the situation was hopeless. Prisoners were treated according to international law. There was a kind of grim professionalism between enemies, a mutual understanding that today's victor might be tomorrow's prisoner. After Malmedy, the rules were gone. American soldiers swore they'd never surrender to the SS. Rumors spread that some American troops would show no mercy to Waffen-SS units, and in a few places the fighting grew darker and more brutal. When Leonard Funk heard about the massacre, those who knew him during that period later said something hardened inside him. He'd already seen too much. Normandy, Holland, friends dying in fields and forests across Europe. But this was different. This was murder. Cold-blooded execution of men who had surrendered, who had trusted in the laws of war. Leonard Funk decided he would never surrender to the Germans. No matter what. That decision would matter very soon. January 29th, 1945. The Ardennes. The German offensive had been broken. Now the Allies were pushing back, mile by frozen mile. Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry got orders to capture the Belgian village of Holzheim. There was a problem. Company C was under strength. Their executive officer, the second in command, had been killed. They didn't have enough men for the assault. Funk was now acting executive officer. He looked at his depleted roster and made a decision. He walked to the company headquarters tent where clerks, supply personnel, and cooks were going about their usual work. These were men who normally never saw combat, who joined the army to type reports and serve meals, not to storm German-held villages. "You're all infantry now," Funk told them, according to accounts that emerged after the war. "Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." He formed a makeshift platoon, 30 men who'd spent most of the war behind desks. They'd had basic training, sure, but real combat. Most had never fired a shot at another human being. One of those men might have said years later, "Most of us had never killed anyone, never even pointed a weapon at an enemy soldier. Funk didn't seem to care. He needed bodies. He'd turn us into warriors." The march to Holzheim was 15 miles through waist-deep snow in a driving blizzard, temperatures well below freezing. German artillery shells exploded around them, harassing fire from the flanks. Funk led from the front, just like he had in Normandy, just like he always did. They reached the village, and German defenders were positioned among the buildings, so the fight quickly turned into close, dangerous combat. Machine guns, rifles, grenades. Funk organized the assault. His clerks, his makeshift warriors, followed him into Holzheim. The fighting was house to house, room to room, the kind of close combat where hesitation means death. By the end of the fighting, the Americans had captured a large number of prisoners, but the situation was still unstable, and only a few men could be spared to guard them. They were corralled in the yard of a farmhouse. Funk looked at his exhausted men. They'd been marching and fighting for hours. There was still resistance in other parts of the village, scattered German soldiers who hadn't surrendered yet. He could only spare 4 men to guard the prisoners. "Keep them here," Funk reportedly told the guards. "We'll send reinforcements when we can." Funk headed back into the fight. He had no idea what was about to happen behind him. While Funk was clearing the rest of Holzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse. Perhaps 10 men, maybe 20, wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow and confusion of battle, they looked almost identical to American troops in winter gear. The 4 guards didn't realize the danger until it was too late. The Germans overwhelmed them, disarmed them, forced them to their knees in the snow. Then they freed the prisoners. 80 German soldiers plus the patrol that freed them. 90 men total. They grabbed weapons from the pile the Americans had stacked in the yard. They organized quickly, efficiently. They knew exactly what they were going to do. Attack Company C from the rear, while Funk's men were scattered across the village, mopping up resistance. If 90 Germans hit them from behind while they were spread out, it would be a massacre. The German officer in charge, likely a lieutenant or captain based on his authority, began giving orders. Veterans would later describe how quickly the situation reversed. "Position the machine guns here. Set up the ambush there. Wait for my signal." That's when Leonard Funk walked around the corner. Funk had come to check on the prisoners. Routine. Make sure the guards were okay. See if reinforcements had arrived. He was not expecting to walk into a large group of German prisoners, many of whom were regaining weapons and preparing to attack. He rounded the corner of the farmhouse and stopped. The scene was surreal. His 4 guards were on their knees in the snow, hands behind their heads. The prisoners, who should have been unarmed and controlled, were standing throughout the area, with some already holding rifles while others were moving towards the weapons. For a moment, nobody moved. Everyone just stared. The German officer spotted Funk immediately. The first sergeant stripes on his sleeve marked him as a leader, a prize catch. The officer strode forward with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. He shoved his MP-40 submachine gun into Funk's stomach and screamed a command in German: "Surrender. Drop your weapon." Funk did not immediately respond to the officer's shouted command, and the tense moment stretched on as both sides watched each other. The officer screamed again, louder this time, his face flushed red. Veins bulged in his neck. Around them, the 90 German soldiers watched and waited. Half of them already held weapons. The other half were still arming themselves from the pile. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. 90 to 1. A weapon pressed to Funk's gut. His 4 men were disarmed and helpless. 1 other American soldier standing beside him, equally helpless. There was no scenario where Leonard Funk won this fight. The sensible thing, the rational thing, was to surrender. Raise his hands, drop his weapon, become a prisoner of war and hope for the best. But Leonard Funk remembered Malmedy. 84 Americans murdered in a field, shot like animals, left to freeze in the snow. He'd already decided he'd never surrender to the Germans. So instead of complying, Leonard Funk did something inexplicable. He started laughing. Nobody knows exactly why Funk laughed. Military analysts studying the incident decades later would offer theories. Maybe it was a deliberate tactic, a ruse to confuse the enemy and buy time. Maybe it was stress, the human brain doing strange things when faced with certain death. Maybe it was genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all, an officer screaming in a language Funk couldn't understand, expecting compliance through volume alone. Funk himself later stated, according to those present during debriefings, that he tried to stop laughing but couldn't. Something about the German officer screaming in German while Funk stood there not understanding a single word touched a nerve. The harder the officer yelled, the funnier it seemed. Whatever the reason, the effect was devastating. The German officer screamed louder. Funk laughed harder. He bent over slightly, shoulders shaking. He called out to his men, "I don't understand what he's saying." Some of the German soldiers started laughing too, caught up in the bizarre tension of the moment. Their officer was turning purple with rage, and this American sergeant wouldn't stop cackling. The officer was completely thrown off. This wasn't how prisoners behaved. They begged for their lives. They pleaded. They complied. They didn't stand there laughing while you shoved a weapon in their stomach and screamed orders they couldn't understand. For a few critical seconds, the German officer didn't know what to do. His training hadn't covered this scenario. His experience fighting the British and French and Russians hadn't prepared him for an American who responded to capture with laughter. And Leonard Funk used those seconds, still appearing to laugh, still acting like a man overcome with nervous amusement. Funk slowly reached up toward his Thompson submachine gun. It was slung over his shoulder in the standard carrying position for paratroopers. The German officer watched. This was good. This made sense. The American was finally surrendering his weapon. Funk's hand closed around Thompson's grip. He began to unsling it slowly, carefully, making it look like compliance. The German officer relaxed slightly, just a fraction. He was about to have another prisoner, another trophy to march back to his commanders. Then Funk moved. In one motion, faster than thought, faster than the German officer could process what was happening, Funk swung the Thompson down and brought the muzzle into line. His finger found the trigger. He squeezed. The M1A1 Thompson fires 45 ACP rounds at 600 rounds per minute. At close range, each round hits with tremendous force. The bullets don't just wound, they destroy. Funk fired a short burst at the German officer at close range, striking him before he could react. The officer was dead before his body hit the ground, before his brain could register what had happened, before he could even begin to feel surprised. Funk didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The moment he started shooting, he committed to killing everyone or dying himself. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no surrender. He pivoted, still firing. Thompson sprayed an arc of lead across the German soldiers nearest to him. Men screamed. Men fell. Blood sprayed across the pristine snow. Brass casings tumbled through the cold air, steaming slightly. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the farmhouse yard, a hammering roar that seemed to go on forever. The magazine ran dry, 30 rounds gone in seconds. This was the critical moment. A Thompson submachine gun takes about 2 seconds to reload if you're practiced. If you've done it thousands of times in training until your hands know the motions without your brain having to think about them. 2 seconds is nothing in normal life. 2 seconds is forever in a firefight. 2 seconds is enough time for 90 Germans to kill 1 American. Funk yanked the empty magazine out, slammed a fresh one in, racked the bolt, and kept shooting. The whole sequence took less than a heartbeat. Pure muscle memory. Thousands of hours of training compressed into one fluid motion that his hands executed while his conscious mind was still processing the fact that he was alive, still fighting, still standing. At the same time, he was screaming at his men, "Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 guards, still on their knees a moment ago, scrambled for the rifles the dead Germans had dropped. Seconds earlier, they'd been prisoners waiting to die. Now they were fighting for their lives, grabbing weapons from the snow, taking cover, returning fire. The Germans were in chaos. Their officer was dead. The American who'd been laughing was now killing them with mechanical precision. Nobody had given orders for this. Nobody knew what to do. Training said to return fire, to take cover, to kill the enemy. But training assumed a certain logic to combat, a certain flow of action and reaction. This wasn't logical. This was one man with a submachine gun standing in the open, firing into a crowd of 90 soldiers, and somehow still alive. Some of the Germans shot back. Bullets cracked past Funk's head. One round killed the American soldier standing beside him. The man dropped without a sound, there 1 second and gone the next, another name for the casualty list, another telegram to a family back home. But Funk kept firing. Keep moving. Kept killing. His guards had weapons now. They were shooting too, adding their fire to his. The Germans were caught in a crossfire they'd never expected, attacked from multiple directions when they should have been doing the attacking. In a very short span of time, the situation completely reversed. By the end of the brief and violent fight, many German soldiers had been killed or wounded, and the remaining prisoners surrendered after American guards regained their weapons and returned fire. The prisoners were prisoners again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of the carnage, smoke rising from his Thompson, surrounded by bodies and blood and spent brass casings. The snow around him was no longer white. He looked at his men, at the Germans with their hands up, at the weapon still warm in his hands. "That," he reportedly said to his guards, "was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." Company C secured Holzheim. The captured Germans, the survivors anyway, were marched to the rear under much heavier guard this time. Funk reported the incident to his commanding officer with the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used to report every other engagement. Just another firefight. Just another day in the war. But the story spread. Through the regiment first, then through the division, then through the entire 82nd Airborne. The sergeant who, according to later accounts, laughed in the face of nearly 90 Germans and killed more than 20 of them with his submachine gun. The short man from Pennsylvania, who'd refused to surrender and somehow survived. The paratrooper who'd turned the tables on his captors in less than a minute. When the Medal of Honor recommendation reached Washington, the evidence was clear, and the action described left little room for doubt. What Funk had done at Holzheim was beyond dispute. Although overwhelmingly outnumbered by a much larger enemy force, an enemy weapon pressed into his stomach, facing almost certain death, and instead of surrendering, he attacked. The official citation, a matter of public record, reads in part, "He was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach." Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder, and then with lightning motion brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer. He turned upon the other Germans, firing and shouting to the other Americans to seize the enemy's weapons. September 5th, 1945. The White House. The war in Europe had been over for 4 months. The war in the Pacific had just ended with Japan's surrender. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. "I would rather have this medal," Truman said, and these words are recorded in multiple historical accounts, "than be President of the United States." Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in the world. The man who had just ended World War II with the atomic bomb. The man who would reshape the entire global order in the years to come. Looking at a 5'5" former store clerk from Pennsylvania and saying, "I'd rather be you." Let's count what Leonard Funk earned during World War II. The Medal of Honor for Holzheim. During the war, Funk earned the Medal of Honor, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and multiple Purple Hearts. He also received foreign decorations, including the Croix de Guerre from France and the Order of Leopold II from Belgium. The Silver Star for leading 18 men through 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy. The Bronze Star for meritorious service. 3 Purple Hearts because he was wounded 3 separate times and kept fighting. Plus foreign decorations. The Croix de Guerre from France, the Order of Leopold from Belgium, the Military Order of William from the Netherlands. Leonard Funk was one of the most highly decorated paratroopers of World War II. 5 feet 5 inches tall, 140 pounds. A man who'd started the war as a draftee and ended it as a legend. The war ended. Funk went home. He didn't write a book about his experiences. He didn't do the lecture circuit, traveling around the country telling war stories to rapt audiences. He didn't turn his Medal of Honor into a speaking career or a political platform. He didn't cash in on his fame, didn't use his decorations to open doors or make money, or build a post-war life on the foundation of what he'd done in combat. Leonard Funk went back to Pennsylvania and got a job with the Veterans Administration. The VA, the massive bureaucracy responsible for taking care of America's former soldiers, helping other veterans navigate the paperwork, processing disability claims, cutting through red tape for men who'd given everything and now needed help getting what they were owed. The same kind of clerk work he might have done before the war, the same quiet, unglamorous, necessary work that keeps the world running while other people get the glory. For 27 years, Leonard Funk sat at a desk and helped veterans. He rose through the ranks, became division chief of the Pittsburgh regional office. Good salary, steady hours, a pension waiting at the end. His wife Gertrude stuck with him through all of it. They had 2 daughters. They lived in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a working-class neighborhood in a working-class town not far from where he'd grown up. The Medal of Honor hung in a case somewhere. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, all the foreign decorations from France and Belgium and the Netherlands. They were there, somewhere in the house. Proof that Leonard Funk had once been more than a bureaucrat processing forms. He never talked about them. When people asked about Holtzheim, about the laughing, about the 90 Germans, he shrugged it off. Did what I had to do, he would say, according to those who knew him. That's it. That's all he would ever say. No elaboration, no war stories, no reliving of past glory. A colleague at the VA, years later, might have remarked to his own family, "We all knew he had the Medal of Honor. It was in his personnel file. But he never mentioned it. You could work next to Len Funk for years and never know you were sitting beside a legend." November 20th, 1992. Braddock Hills, Pennsylvania. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. died of cancer. He was 76 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, among those who served and sacrificed in America's wars, among the heroes of every American war. At the time of his death, he was one of the last surviving recipients of the Distinguished Service Cross from the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II. A fitness center at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, was named after him. A highway in Pennsylvania carries his name. A post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him in 2023. And yet, most Americans have never heard of Leonard Funk. They know Audie Murphy. They know Alvin York. But they do not know the quiet paratrooper who took decisive action against a much larger enemy force and helped turn a desperate situation into survival. Here is what Leonard Funk's story tells us. War does not favor the biggest or the strongest. It does not reward recklessness or blind courage. War favors the person who keeps thinking when everyone else has stopped, and who sees one narrow chance when all others see only surrender or death. At a farmhouse in eastern France, Funk had every reason to give up. 90 German soldiers surrounded him. A weapon was pressed into his stomach. His men had already been captured. Any reasonable soldier would have raised his hands and hoped to survive. Funk may have been influenced by recent events in the war, including reports of prisoners being killed after surrendering, where American prisoners had been murdered after surrendering. He was thinking about his captured men, and about the American soldiers nearby who would be attacked from behind if these Germans moved forward. So he laughed. Maybe it was deliberate. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was disbelief. Whatever the reason, the laughter created confusion. It bought him seconds. And in war, seconds are everything. While the German officer hesitated, Funk moved. In less than a minute, the impossible had happened. The prisoner became the attacker. The surrounded man became the survivor. President Harry Truman once said, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." That statement matters because it shows what true courage means. Courage is not size, strength, or training. Courage is action taken when fear is unavoidable. Courage is what you do when surrender seems logical. Courage is refusing to accept defeat even when defeat appears certain. Leonard Funk proved that one determined person can be more dangerous than many who expect obedience. He showed that the strongest weapon is not always the gun, but the decision to act. The farmhouse at Holzheim is quiet now. The snow falls clean each winter. The men who fought there are gone. But the story remains. It is the story of a sergeant who laughed when he should have surrendered, who fought when survival was unlikely, and who lived because he refused to quit. After the war, Funk returned to Pennsylvania and spent many years helping other veterans with their benefits and paperwork. He died quietly in 1992. His grave looks like many others at Arlington, with one small difference: Medal of Honor recipient. For 60 seconds on a frozen afternoon, Leonard Funk showed what one person can do when they refuse to accept defeat. And that is what courage looks like. If stories of courage, determination, and the extraordinary actions of ordinary people inspire you, subscribe to our channel. We bring history to life through the voices and experiences of those who lived it, ensuring their sacrifices and triumphs are never forgotten. Join us as we explore the remarkable stories that shaped our world.